Welcome to the Aviation Insurance Podcast, the podcast that helps aircraft owners and aviation businesses learn and understand the complex world of aviation insurance and risk management. From the basic principles of aviation insurance to risk management techniques and updates on the aviation insurance market, the Aviation Insurance Podcast is your guide to traverse the world of aviation insurance. Now, here's your host, Tim Bonnell.
Well, welcome back to the Aviation Insurance Podcast, where we've been looking at the fundamentals of aviation insurance, and we've done that by digging into the high overview of aircraft insurance policies, and now we've been going through the aviation commercial general liability policies, or aviation CGL. And so we're going to continue that discussion through the journey of the aviation CGL policy, talking about various endorsements or things we need to do on some of these key exclusions that we just discussed in the previous episode. So as we discussed in these exclusions, a lot of them are designed to be covered elsewhere. That's why they're there. Some of them are designed to be covered via other insurance policies that are completely separate, and some of them via endorsement. The carrier doesn't want to offer those coverages unless they know what the exposure is in general terms. And so just looking at the exclusions we discussed, we talked about air shows and air meets. That probably needs a separate policy. You can talk to your carrier. Restaurants, either an endorsement or separate policy. Skydiving, probably out of luck. The noise and pollution. Pollution does require a separate policy. We'll talk about that another day. War risk and allied perils. We've talked about that in a separate episode. Go to that episode. I'm not going to repeat about war risk and allied perils is excluded. There is an endorsement to write back most of those exclusions except for nuclear. And that is a big topic on its own. So please go back to the episode that we talked about war risk and allied perils coverage, and either on our website, on YouTube, wherever you want to find it on your favorite podcast player. Obviously, any type of in the business of serving alcohol requires either some form of liquor liability endorsement or separate policy. Anything related to employees' injury is workers' compensation, right? So workers' compensation is a separate policy. It's different for every state you're in. Talk to your agent. Workers' compensation is going to be the first and only remedy for injuries to employees. Employment practices liability is a separate policy you need to purchase for exposures due to the hiring, firing, how you treat, and things you do with your employees. That's not covered, and that is a separate policy. So all those other exclusions we talked about, non-aviation activities, property owned by the insured or in their care custody control, either a separate endorsement or policy. So one of the big ones, contractual liability. That is an exclusion we really didn't get into because I knew I'd get into it today. And basically, there's typically an exclusion that says that the insurance does not apply to bodily injury or property damage for which the insured is obligated to pay for damages for the reason of assumption of someone else's liability in a contract or an agreement, meaning they have now acquired some liability they did not have from someone else via a contract they've entered into. I mean, there's a lot of contracts in aviation: service agreements, lease agreements, hangering agreements, all kinds of pilot service, whatever the agreements. That is often excluded under the unendorsed CGL policy in aviation. Now, there are some things that are okay, called an insured contract. That's defined in the policy, and we'll spend more time on that another day. But if you have any contracts with other people, you need to make sure that the contractual liability endorsement is on the policy, and that unless it's an insured contract, that contract is approved as a designated contract and reported and approved within 30 days of the execution of that contract for the coverage to really be fully enforced. Another one you want to look out for is independent contractors. Not all policies exclude this, but oftentimes an operator will hire or an airport or whoever it is, an independent contractor for a number of reasons. An airport may have construction projects, runway extensions, hangar construction. FBOs may hire people for various things, repairs, HVAC things, lawn mowing services, all kinds of things, trash services that could lead to aircraft metal or composite getting damaged. And so oftentimes operators will be held liable for hiring and or negligent supervision of their independent contractors. So even if there's an agreement transferring risk to the independent contractors, there may be some liability for that lack of supervision or the lack of due diligence in the hiring process. So all of the insured's obligations cannot be transferred, unfortunately, when it comes to independent contractors. So make sure that there's either not an exclusion or that there is an endorsement for independent contractors in the aviation CGL policy for anyone with an aviation operation. Independent contractors are going to be involved at some point in time. Okay, some other key aviation CGL endorsements we'll probably see. And again, we're just scratching the surface. There are a lot of endorsements, a lot of possibilities. We can't possibly cover them all. I just want to highlight a few key ones. One of them we just talked about a little bit in the exclusion about liquor and liquor liability. Well, if they're not in the business of or sell alcohol or distribute it, then typically they can have coverage under the host liquor liability provision, which is either having the lack of an exclusion or adding in the this endorsement, usually free, not always, but if somebody has a Christmas party or serves alcohol on a random basis, one of the people in attendance was overserved, left, got in an accident, and injured someone else, and the operation was held liable for overserving the individual. That's where the host liquor endorsement would come in. Another one used to be called fire damage legal liability. It's now usually referred to as damage to premises leased. It's one of those where, if you're leasing a hangar from the city airport authority and your negligence sets the whole thing on fire, there's a little bit of coverage there under damage you make to the building you lease or rent, and provide some coverage where there might not have been. So damage to premises rented to you or fire damage legal liability. We've talked a little bit about autos and boats and aircraft that are owned having being excluded under the policy. However, there is an endorsement called on-premises auto liability, which provides some coverage for auto airside on an airport. Now, each policy is a little bit different, but typically this was originally designed as an excess policy, providing excess to the automobile's primary liability coverage, and it was on the airside. Now, with a lot of service providers who are required to have badging, a lot of times they may need 5 or 10 million of liability limits to get a badge at a larger airport. And they could only maybe get $1 million or if they're really lucky, $2 million of primary auto liability coverage. Well, often if they're carrying a $5 or $10 million aviation CGL limit, we can usually get the on-premises auto to satisfy the airport's auto requirements. Be on the lookout for some carriers might put on-premises auto for non-owned autos. That's not good. You typically want it to include your owned autos. Again, any vehicle licensed for road use would fall under this coverage. On-premises auto liability can be used in a number of ways. This is just kind of a good introduction to it. Garage keepers liability for those who FBOs, charter outfits, corporate operations who may have automobiles that they don't own, where they might valet or park them in their hangar. Garage keepers is similar to the hangar keepers discussion. Not the same, but similar. It's kind of the damage to non-owned vehicles, automobiles, in the care, custody, or control of the insured. So if those things are going on, that's a great endorsement to make sure is on the policy. Incidental medical malpractice. More and more you'll see buildings with AED machines, people trained for CPR. This coverage is for people who are not professional medical professionals. Doctors and nurses would not be eligible for this. The coverage would not apply to them. But Good Samaritan CPR on an airplane or at the airport facility there, using an AED machine, incidental medical malpractice provides some protection for a suit you might get into to the policy terms and limits. We talked about the difficulty on those higher limits. Sometimes the aviation CGL has been used to get excess automobile liability. That would include off-airport and also excess employer's liability, which is the second part of the workers' compensation policy. Unfortunately, those limits have been, excess limits have been brought way down or done away with as the market's hardened in recent years, but you might still see that. It's a good one to know about. Again, there are a host of other potential endorsements here. We'll try to hit some of the highlights. Contractual liability is a big topic. We'll spend more time on it. The war risk and allied perils is a big exclusion that you probably need to think about. There's a lot of important words in there you're hearing a lot about today. Insurrection, riots, malicious acts, seizure, confiscation. All these things are important words that are excluded under the War Risk and Allied Perils exclusion. So please, again, go back to that episode. If you have contracts, let's pay attention to this contractual issue. But just know that as coverage is excluded or taken away, there are endorsements and or other policies to help treat these exposures other than nuclear-related and similar exposures. So be sure you know what's on your policy and ask for solutions to those that aren't on there. Again, there are other key ones, but we just wanted to give you an overview today of the endorsements that will help address the exclusions of the aviation CGL policy. And that's enough for that topic. And until next time, as we join us on the next episode as we continue navigating the waypoints in aviation insurance. Until then, we hope that you enjoy clear skies and unlimited visibility.
Thanks for listening to the Aviation Insurance Podcast. If you found this episode of value, please share it with someone who would benefit from this information. Don't forget to subscribe in your podcast player so you don't miss any new episodes and to help our show have more impact. This episode is brought to you by Aeris Insurance Solutions, your flight plan for navigating the turbulence of aviation insurance. For more information, visit aerosinsurance.com. That is www.aerisinsurance.com. Disclaimer: these episodes are for educational purposes only, and due to the changing regulatory and legal nature of the business, some information may change over time. Having a well-educated and experienced aviation insurance broker on your team is an absolute requirement to success in business and for managing your aircraft and aviation business risks.